CRT, or critical race theory, is a name given to the body of studies by legal theorists who examine why inequality and racism still persists in the United States, despite having landmark legislation passed during the Civil Rights Movement. In an article in Education Week back in 2021, it mentioned that the core idea of CRT is that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but something that is embedded in the legal systems and policies. These policies affect housing, education, healthcare, employment, etc. Oh, America. Hello, and welcome back to The Conversation Piece with your host, Akila. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for, quote, fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. One of critical race theory scholars is Kimberly Crenshaw, and here is what she had to say about the pushback that CRT is receiving.
Race theory just says, let's pay attention to what has happened in this country and how what has happened in this country is continuing to create differential outcomes so we can become that country that we say we are. So critical race theory is not anti-patriotic. In fact, it is more patriotic than those who are opposed to it because we believe in the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment. We believe in the promises of equality, and we know we can't get there if we can't confront and talk honestly about inequality.
Let's try to get a few things correct about CRT. CRT is a graduate level scholarship. So the notion that this is being taught in elementary, middle, or high school appears to be hyperbolic, dog whistling tactics meant to ensure that enough people and enough public outrage by parents is pushed forward. So policy and laws against CRT take root, i.e. House Bill 999 and the Stop Woke Act in Florida. An opponent of CRT is a conservative right-wing activist named Christopher Rufo. Rufo has been on several Fox News shows sharing his opinion about CRT, a topic in which he has zeroed in on. He believes that CRT is, quote, a revolutionary program that would overturn the principle of the Declaration and destroy the remaining structure of the Constitution, end quote. He is also an opponent on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Here is audio of Rufo and MSNBC contributor and professor Eddie Vlad Jr. having an exchange on the cable news show Morning Joe. In it, you will hear Mr. Vlad take Rufo to task for trying to rebrand CRT.
Christopher, you first. Yeah, that's absolutely right. This is one of the biggest kind of misconceptions. You can teach about slavery, discrimination, and racism without using critical race theory. Critical race theory, in simple terms, is an academic discipline that holds that the United States was founded on racism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and that those forces are still at the root of our society today. Critical race theory reformulates the old Marxist dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed, but it replaces the class categories of bourgeoisie and proletariat with the racial categories of white and black. And if you look at the academic literature, the critical race theorists aren't merely saying we should examine the history of racial inequality or racial injustice. They're saying things that are much deeper. They call into question the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. They call into question the First Amendment right to free speech. They oppose capitalism and believe that a system of collectivism must be implemented in order to improve society. It's not a benign philosophy about teaching racism. It's a radical philosophy that's rooted in Marxism and is frankly inappropriate as a pedagogical framework for teaching children.
Academia for so many years.
Sure. Critical race theory emerges within the context of law schools, Joe, in response in particular to the Bakke case, as folk are trying to think about the relationship between race, racism, and American law, right? The rule of law, questions of equal access and due process. So there's this argument that we needed to expand outward, that we, in order to understand the way race functions within the law, we need to understand these other broader historical, social, and economic realities. And so there's this attempt to think about the U.S. in a very, very complex and nuanced way. And I think it's really important that your opening question actually reveals something. For Christopher, and if I could call you by your first name, you've already stated very explicitly that this is not about the substance of critical race theory. This is about branding. You tweeted it, right? So this is an empty signifier to capture all of these things that so-called are unpopular for Americans. And so part of what I want to suggest, Joe, is not about whether or not we actually get critical race theory right. That's not actually the point that Christopher and his allies are actually engaged in. What we need to be asking is, why are they doing this at this point? Why are they making these arguments at this moment?
You may or may not have heard Mr. Ruffo reply no when Mr. Vlad Jr. mentioned his tweets, but the internet does not forget a thing. Ruffo deliberately and publicly tweeted, quote, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans," end quote. So how do we as complex human beings have a conversation about history and race that deal with complex human beings who have been racialized in this country? That is a fact. Race is a construct, a caste system that was introduced in the early days of domestic slavery in this nation. But people have differing opinions on CRT, and most cannot even properly define what CRT is.
A recent school board meeting in a wealthy suburb of Washington, D.C. erupted into pandemonium.
You're teaching children to hate others because of their skin color.
At meetings and protests across the country, conservative activists are accusing schools of teaching critical race theory, a once obscure academic concept that has sparked demonstrations and classroom bans in some states. But a Reuters Ipsos poll out Thursday found that very few Americans know what CRT is, and many who claim to be familiar with it, in fact, embrace a variety of misconceptions and falsehoods circulating among conservative media.
When I heard that teachers and students were having critical race theory shoved down their throats and young white kids were being told that there was something wrong with them because of the color of their skin, I became very concerned.
For example, the Reuters poll found that 22% of those who said they were familiar with critical race theory said they thought CRT is taught in most high schools. It is not. It's mostly a subject for scholars. 33% of respondents said they believe CRT, quote, says that white people are inherently bad or evil, or that, quote, discriminating against white people is the only way to achieve equality. It does not. Critical race theory asserts that racism is woven into the U.S. legal system and ingrained in its primary institutions, creating an uneven playing field for non-white Americans.
We need critical race theory because we need real history.
Among respondents who said they were familiar with CRT, only 5% correctly answered all 7 true-false questions that the poll asked about the history and teachings of critical race theory. Only 32% correctly answered more than 4 of the 7 questions. Despite the misconceptions and misinformation about CRT, a majority of Americans want slavery and its legacy taught in high school. 73% of American adults say they support teaching students learning about racism and its impact on the country.
Madam Chair, if we could.
Is this about CRT or something else? Is critical race theory being used as a Trojan horse for another agenda? It could be both, because another agenda that conservatives want to advance is school choice. Rufo is reported to have said, quote, "To get universal school choice, you really need to operate from a premise of universal public school distrust," end quote. Rufo supported Florida House Bill 1557, or otherwise known as the Don't Say Gay Bill, as he has made assertions that public schools discussing LGBTQAI+ issues is a form of grooming, and that schools are hunting grounds for teachers, and parents need to worry about grooming. Some have viewed his remarks as his goal is to foster anger against public schools, so it turns attention towards private education. School choice has its roots all the way back to Brown versus the Board of Education, the landmark Supreme Court case that ruled that segregated schools are unconstitutional. Some segregationists promoted private school vouchers to prevent them from sending their kids to school that were about to be desegregated. John Hale is an author of the book, The Choice We Face: How Segregation, Race, and Power have shaped America's most controversial education reform movement. Hale highlights the elitist and racist origins into the movement behind school privatization agendas. In an interview with NEA, he stated, quote, "We need to know what school choice is and how it evolved over time. I wanted to start with race front and center because the people who use the word choice talk about it and advocate for it in a way in which they are ignoring or dismissing race. People will say these policies have nothing to do with race, but they do." Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, widely credited with popularizing school vouchers and other similar programs in the 1950s, disavowed racial segregation, but supported the rights of Southerners to choose to attend segregated all-white schools. So race is baked into this notion of school choice. So that's where you have to start. If we don't, we're missing the entire point, end quote. I have been paying more attention to the language people use now. The message and the messenger is a vital point of communication, and the language around CRT and identity politics are key aspects to pay attention to. We hear politicians pick talking points and repeat the message, hoping that the language catches on, and it becomes a political agenda. Conservatives are especially good at staying on brand, so when I hear DeSantis tout school choice vouchers as freedom, choice, and the state of Florida has been advocating for school choice for over 25 years. But the newest bill is proposing using tax dollars to redirect money used for public school education and funneling it towards private schools. Florida is one of the states that allow public money to go to voucher or charter schools. And I find it ironic that conservatives are the loudest about woke indoctrination, but some of the textbooks offered in these schools can also be criticized as indoctrination, with some of the language being used to describe history. Take, for instance, textbooks from two of the country's largest markets, California and Texas, covering the same topics from slavery to civil rights to immigration, with the same authors and publisher. But because the textbooks are going to two different states, one categorized as blue and the other as red, the textbooks are customized differently. A 2018 study from the Southern Poverty Law Center stated that only 8% of high school students can identify that slavery was the main central cause of the Civil War. The language around slavery has shifted in large part thanks to the Daughters of the Confederacy and the Lost Cause theory, but that is kept out of the books. And the political divide in this country has made its way into how our nation's history is written. We do not have a shared history in this country anymore, and it is shaping how we view each other and how we talk with each other.
years.
Today, Republican lawmakers in Tallahassee announced a plan for universal school choice. Now, if approved, their bill makes all students eligible to receive state funds for private tuition, regardless of income or ability. Capitol reporter Forrest Saunders takes a look at what's quickly become a controversial idea.
The culmination of more than 2 decades of GOP work on Florida's school vouchers may have arrived.
Today, we empower parents and children to decide the education that best fits their needs.
HB 1 getting filed Thursday morning, seeking to overhaul the system and open up state scholarships for private schooling, even homeschooling, to everyone.
Florida is committed, has always been committed, and will always be committed to providing the best education system possible.
The plan strips the low-income requirements from the Family Empowerment Scholarship, allowing any public school eligible student to apply. Low-income families would still get priority, however. And there's more. Families homeschooling can get a slice of state dollars as well for things like online lessons or even private tutoring. Republicans, including former Governor Jeb Bush, have heaped praise on the idea. Florida Senate President, too, suggesting the upper chamber will be in lockstep with the House.
You're going to see bipartisan support for this bill. Maybe I'm going out on a limb, but I don't think so.
Although immediate reactions from Democrats, not positive.
To be clear, there's nothing in this bill that I like.
In a response to the bill's filing, members of the minority caucus called HB 1 a betrayal of Florida's public schools. Members worried the result will be more students in private education where state standards for educators and academics don't apply.
Why aren't we taking this extra money and making each one of our public schools a school of excellence?
With super minorities in both chambers of the legislature, it will be tough, if not impossible, for opponents to defeat the bill as more and more Republicans support it. Even so, it will now be one of the big policies to watch when lawmakers gavel in March 7th. At the Capitol, Forrest Saunders, ABC Action News.
Conservatives want history taught from the perspective of patriotism and American exceptionalism. And liberals want a shift in perspective to teach from a more holistic, broader view to include the experience of historically marginalized groups. A California textbook might address white resistance to Black progress as, quote, movement of some white Americans from cities to suburbs was driven by a desire to get away from more culturally diverse neighborhoods, while the Texas textbook addresses the same issue as, quote, some people wish to escape the crime and congestion of the city. Textbooks construct the subject matter not around students, but according to the standards of the states. What happens when a state has a nefarious agenda? I'll explain after the break. Hey, for those of you who want to vibe out with Cece, check out her YouTube channel called Awaken, spelled AWAYKENNED. Yes, it's spelled the way it's spelled. Again, AWAYKENNED. She gives great advice, she has a great personality, and she recently introduced a new character called OG, with a beeper and all. Yes, I know. Some of you are like, what's a beeper? Hey you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Do you have Spotify? If so, turn on the notification button. You can also find the Conversation Piece podcast on Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Pocket Cast, RadioPublic.com, Breaker.audio, and Anchor.fm/Akila Lynch, spelled AQUILA-LYNCH. Thank you for your support. Press On, the latest book from author C.C. Robinson. The full title, Press On, Awareness to Overcome All While Healing Debts of the Heart, Mind, and Soul, available on Amazon, BalboaPress.com, and BarnesandNoble.com. So what are you waiting for? Click that order button. Mississippi is set to introduce a bill, House Bill 1020, which reads like a second coming of Jim Crow. The bill proposes to create an all-white control district and a majority black district with 83%, with no elected officials, judges, and prosecutors. This new zone would be policed by an expanded Capitol Police Force, but the play is that these people would be appointed and not elected, and so the majority black residents would have no voting rights on these positions, and a percentage of their taxes would be redirected to pay for this. Taxation without representation. This is Mississippi, a state that created the first black codes, a state known for its lynchings, and in 1922, the Mississippi Senate voted to ship its black residents to Africa, and in 2022, the state finally removed the Confederate flag from its banner. Oh, Mississippi. "37 states have introduced bills or taken steps to restrict the teaching of CRT, and some of these bills are an overreach, and it feels like the country is teetering on the edge of authoritarianism, which could lead us down the path of introducing memory laws. So, the constant branding by politicians, especially those on the right, of anything regarding CRT and now DEI as woke or woke identity politics falls in line with a theory called illusionary truth effect. We as people are wired to believe in something the more we see and hear a word or phrase. This is why advertising and propaganda are such vital, useful tools used in marketing and politics. The co-opting of language is a tool that the ruling class employ to uphold the status quo in their position. Any movement trying to dismantle and disrupt the status quo is met with equal or more resistance, like the term woke. Fox News mentioned the term woke in 2017 96 times. In 2018, the term woke was mentioned 142 times. In 2019, 264 times. In 2020, the word was mentioned 339 times. In 2021, 1,022 times. And in 2022, 1,087 times. Language changes over time, and the word woke has a different definition depending upon who is using the term. USA Today took a poll in which they defined the word woke as to be informed, educated on, and aware of social injustices. 56% of respondents agreed with that meaning, while 39% defined it as to be overtly politically correct. Martin Luther King Jr. in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, wrote, quote, "The majority of white Americans consider themselves sincerely committed to justice for the Negro. They believe that American society is essentially hospitable to fair play and steady growth toward a middle-class utopia, embodying racial harmony. Unfortunately, this is a fantasy of self-deception and comfortable vanity." End quote. The past is not dead, so said William Faulkner. It is not even past. If we are to truly become a united nation, indivisible with liberty and justice for all, we have to find a way to progress forward together. But the past needs to be reconciled with first, and we can't heal unless we address the wound. But pretending the wound does not exist, or rewriting the story so that the wound does not look so ugly, is an injustice to us all. Here's a preview of the next episode.
I'm going to ask a question, and this is me asking the question, but when really did Black Americans become legal citizens?
I would say 1965. Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Conversation Piece Podcast. I am your humble host, Akila, requesting that you join me again. So, until then, be safe, love, and value yourself so that you can love and value others. I bid you adieu with the greeting, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.